I have been looking forward to this, Tiffany, since you said yes,
Yeah,
because
it's gonna be super fun. We haven't connected in a minute.
I know, and I missed your podcast launch party thanks to COVID vaccine timings, but I am so excited. And I gotta tell you, like the first time that I saw you speak, I was just in awe. I'm like, this woman is so freaking confident and fun and light. I don't typically see somebody who can be all of those. They're either like confident and like, come on, or they're, so light that you're like, do you know what you're doing? You are just this beautiful blend, and I was like not surprised at all that you created a podcast called Scared Confident. I'm like, that's freaking perfect. That's a great way to like stay accessible and stay real with us and authentic and talk about this thing that I'm sure, does everybody typically say that you're this confident human that they want to learn from you in that way, how to be more confident?
Well, I think that's part of the reason I did it. I'll have two things on that. When you saw me speak that one time, I know that part of the way that I stay creative is to stay scared. And so I had challenged myself to present with no slides.
That's right. I
And
remember that now.
and
Yeah.
so like you have to kind of become the performance because there's nothing else for people to look at but you. And so I think I shared with the audience, I'm like brought you into the narrative that this is what we're doing and this could be a disaster. And if so, you guys will totally understand why. And that's what's going to happen. Um,
Yes.
so I think that's important, at least for me, maybe not for everybody, but I am more acute in the way that I experience everything around me when I'm just a little bit scared and uncomfortable. And I find that like recharges my creative energy. So
Ooh,
you experienced me in that space.
I love it. There's
But
something
yeah,
really human about it. I love it.
I think we are afraid to be vulnerable. And this project of Scare Confident, what I have found is that the older you get, people actually want to append all these successes on you because they want to believe that it's possible for them. And so you increasingly get seen through the lens of the things that you've done instead of the journey or the person you are.
Mm,
And I found other people they don't know the stories and you don't feel like you can tell the part that failed or the fear cycle or the head game. And I started to realize if that part is also going to be part of people understanding who Tiffany is, what I did, who I impacted, I have to put that part on the shelf because others aren't going to do that for me. And
mm.
so that launched this thing that became Scare Confident. And like everything, I sort of started it with a little understanding of what I was doing, but it kind of became what you hear now. So yeah, it's been great.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, I'm excited to talk more about this project, about your perspective on life, because you always bring this fresh perspective and this courageous perspective and very real because it's easy to kind of idealize somebody and to have you just say like this is the journey that it took me to get here. This is the fear that I wrestle with. I know that's something that we all need a reminder of. So I'm just so grateful that you're here. If you haven't met Tiffany yet, just real quick about her. She's the president and CEO of Element 3. It's an awesome marketing group here in Indianapolis. She's obviously the CEO. She's responsible for the vision, for top line growth. She's building a world-class team, and I know that there's so many millennials that want to work alongside her because of the way that she speaks and leads. And it's not just that she has this awesome team. She's been in this leadership position since 2006. So she's got some things that she can teach us. And she's continued to grow the company. She's been featured with her leadership. Element 3 has appeared in Inc. 5000 6 consecutive times, and they've won numerous awards. I don't want to spend all of our time reading the awards, but they are highly successful, growing, and I know a big part of that is because of Tiffany's self-awareness and her leadership, and she continues to stretch herself and put herself out there. And I know from the first time I saw her speak, probably 4 years ago, 3 years ago now, I was like, something is going to happen. This woman is going to change the perception of leadership. And I was so curious to see how she would do it. And one way out of the many ways that she's doing that is by creating this podcast called Scared Confident. And there's no one else I would rather bring on the porch today to talk about confidence than Tiffany Sauder. So thank you so much for coming and talking about your new project and everything that you're learning from it.
Yeah, thanks. This will be fun, Lindsay. Look forward to it.
Yes. So, okay, you've been a leader for a while. And I think I look at you as a mentor for me. And I also know that, you continue to grow and develop. And I'm so curious, what's something that you've learned that's changed? What's a perspective shift that you've had around leadership, maybe in the last 20 years? What are some shifts that you've taken on? Because I know you're always growing. You have that growth mindset.
Well, I think one of the things I've learned, and I actually just posted this recently on LinkedIn, is that it is our scars and our stories that are relatable, not our accomplishments. And I think when you think about being a leader, it's sort of like this armored up version of like power and courage and like wisdom. And that's what it's going to be like to really be a leader and to arrive. And I have found the more I've like shed that and just like literally been myself and shared my observations, and I
Hmm.
would say trust my intuition, which doesn't sound very transferable, but I think we all know when somebody's telling us something and you're like, your body language changed there. Can we talk about that? Because I actually think there's something there. And I would notice those moments as a younger leader and not have the courage to sort of like stop the tape and go to what was probably the real thing I needed to be listening to or leading through or understanding or providing empathy around.
Yeah.
And I just think with wisdom or like with experience, I realize that those little intuition moments are like my wisdom speaking to me. And I have more courage to step into that. So I think we're looking for leaders to normalize our experiences as followers. Am I on the right
Right.
path? Am I doing the right thing? Am I getting close enough? Like, am I wrong? I think that, and I think as leaders, our job is to be like, no, 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 you're on the right track. Let me normalize your path. Um, and I think, yeah, we're connecting to something. So I'll let you talk.
No, I'm taking notes over here. That's what I'm here for. Everybody's taking notes. That's going to go on LinkedIn tomorrow with a
Yeah.
quote from you. But that's such a good way to say it, that we're looking for leaders to normalize our experience
Mhm.
and you do that. You do that so well. I think this other piece that you're talking about too, with almost, I see you in a meeting, and we've been in a couple meetings together, not as much as I would love, but we've been in some meetings together, and
Mhm.
I watch you do kind of have this way of observing, not being so sucked into the agenda and so sucked into what we're doing, that you're able to really create that space of observing and watching everyone in the room and still getting things done. But I can see how that takes some maturity to be able to hold space for what might happen in the room and where how people are actually presenting in the room too.
Yeah, I think people actually they can't not give you clues. I think that as leaders, we get so focused on our own agendas. And I actually got great advice really early in my career. And I don't know again if this is just I leaned on preparation very hard because I was very young and I was doing work for people that were much more experienced than me. And so preparation was my crutch.
Mhm.
I would do all the things. And what it took away from the meeting is your ability to be present because you trusted your preparation and not your ability to show up well. And so
Yeah.
the person that I was working with at the time, they actually shoved me all the way into the other end of the pool, and they said, "I don't want you to prepare for anything." And I needed the extreme example so that I could see that my mind will show up for me. Now,
Ooh.
the right place is somewhere in between. So
Yeah,
don't take
sure.
what I'm saying
Sure.
literally. But he literally had me go into meetings where I like wanted to pee my pants, completely unprepared, as a way for me to see on the counterbalance of, no, my mind will show up. I do know. And when you're so wrapped in preparation, we don't do this. And I think actually as leaders, we do this too. If you think about like annual reviews,
Yeah.
prepare, prepare, prepare. Let's talk about the things. Or, not being as willing to step into real time feedback because I haven't totally gotten my thoughts together. It's like
Yeah.
that's us wrapping ourselves in preparation instead of just being like, hey, I got to share this with you. And I think we've got to show up I think we've got to show up. I think that's how we show up more authentically. Is it's like, hey, I'm going to do this in more real time versus wrapped in this preparation of stuff. So
Almost like it sounds like just embodying these principles and not saying like I have to have an outline before we do this, but if you practice giving feedback in real time enough too, that'll be your norm too. So that's probably normal for you now. It would be odd for you to not give feedback in real time.
yeah, I hope people would say that. Again, I think it takes. Here's what I found is we say things like this in our heads of, well, that could be an outlier. I don't want to pounce all over it just once. Or, I'm going to wait to see if it, instead of giving that person the, the benefit of your observation or saying, hey, that could be
Yeah.
way off on this, but I wanted to share this observation or the way that I experienced you. It might not be a pattern for you, but just wanted to share it. And otherwise, I find we just wait and wait and wait and wait. Another small piece of advice I've been given, I like remember the world in like these little shot glasses of information you'll quickly find. Is if everything is a big deal, nothing becomes a big deal.
Mhm. Mhm.
Meaning, if you think about in your relationship, right? If you if you show up like that, like I felt like you weren't as totally honest with me if you could have been in that moment. And here's how I experienced that. You're gonna shut that down right away versus letting it get bigger and bigger and bigger. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And I think culturally, when we're leading from a values perspective, when we let just one degree sort of go instead of really honoring the true intent of the values and getting people back to their plumb line really fast, we get this like erosion naturally. And I think that can create, issues long term.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And this idea that you shared that your observation is valuable, like don't hold it back, don't wait. Just share it. And I think you naturally talk in a tone of like curiosity, probably because of your background in marketing and personal development in these pieces. But you can share an observation that is super valuable. And it, like you said, if it's this big, then there's not a lot of heat behind it either. It's, hey, I observed this thing.
Mhm.
May not be a pattern, maybe. Let's talk about it.
Well, a hack is always to ask for permission first. You know,
Yeah. Yep.
and this goes back to I think the whole scare confident narrative is the reason we don't bring it forward is because we're afraid. We're afraid that the
Exactly.
person is going to experience judgment. We're afraid that we're going to be wrong and that our insight was, not true. We're afraid it's all comes from a place of like hidden insecurity. And so I started to just be able to observe this and give language to it to myself to be like, I'm not I'm making up all these noble reasons in my head about why I'm not stepping into this. But it's basically is like I don't want to look like I'm a scary boss. I don't want to look like, I don't want to feel like I'm judging them. I want to create an open
Yes.
space where they can be themselves. It's like, oh, maybe, but maybe I also have some things that can help speed up their, success journey.
I think that's so great. We talk about creating more humane, compassionate environments. It's kind of let's take the mystery out of these situations and just talk about them. And I know we started with my work in the having that generational lens and consulting and trying to help companies understand the next generation. We talk a lot about that idea of transparency. Just we need to talk about when there's something hanging in the air, it's natural to interpret that something's wrong. And we can feel tension in the air, especially
Mhm.
after this last year. And so taking time to even practice those, not even when there's a situation that's risen up to the top, but even practicing, like, have I ever actually said out loud, hey, can I give you a piece of feedback? I just want to like ask for permission if I can share this piece with you. We don't even practice that with like training wheels on. So it does feel
Mhm.
like this big, scary thing to say it in real time when we're a little bit irritated.
Yeah, I'd be curious, Lindsay, and this is kind of putting on the spot, and it's not necessarily the part of this generational differences that you've studied,
Mhm.
but do you see fear is the same across generations in the way that they show, like sort of the way it manifests, or do you see a difference in the way it shows up in the professional environment?
I think some of that is developmental, potentially more than generational. So,
Yeah.
fear, how do people show up when they're afraid and they're 20 and they don't know what to
Right.
expect? What I have heard through generations is that when you're really young and something feels off, you speak up sometimes before you even know better, like, oh, that's a CEO. You can't say that to the CEO. Or there tends to be more lack of
Mhm.
restraint, especially before you're like 25. And some of that's developmental because when you don't know the rules that you're supposed to
Right.
play by and you're still developing into an adult, you'll say things that just like, my 9-year-old will say something to me and I'm like, "Oh, that's," she's like, "You have a zit." And I'm like, "Okay, thank you so much."
Mhm.
Thank you for the feedback, moving on, but I think some of it's developmental. I think the actual fear that people have ultimately is the same when we don't want to be at a job where we don't have autonomy, where we're not heard. None of us want to be treated like objects. We want to feel like we can be real humans when we show up, but I tend to see that the way it's verbalized and the way that it comes out, actually your age and your experiences may influence that more than your actual generation.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that. That's great. Yeah, I can
That's a
totally see that.
lot. That's a
Mhm.
lot of actual intergenerational tension. Is just, it's not really because they're Gen Z, it's because they're 20. And
Mhm.
since 700 BC, we have complained about the youngins and how they're changing the world the wrong way.
I think one of the things I've learned too about fear, and this is not so much even generational either, but in understanding people where they came from, their family patterns and
Exactly. You got it.
um, all that plays a huge role in helping me understand why they're showing up the way that they are.
That's
And
exactly right.
yeah, for
How
sure.
do you think, why do you think it's so important to acknowledge fear? Why do you think that's important to talk about the role it plays in our lives?
Well, I think that when we don't, there's places all of us are faking it. And I think I think there's two reasons. I think there's places where fear exists where we're faking it really hard. And when we can stop to understand and acknowledge the fear, we can replace the faking it with the genuine version of ourselves.
Hmm.
The other piece that I would say, I feel like my gift to the world is growing humans. Like I love it. I love coaching, not like in the traditional sense of like bats and balls, but I love coaching young people. I love helping people better understand themselves. I just love all of that. And I think if we want to really step into the fullness of our potential of what we as the humankind can do, part of that is arresting control back from our fear. And what I learned from my fear journey and inside of Scare Confident is that my fear is not me. It is it is separate from me. And we have the saying that we say in the Scare Confident world, like, I am not fear. I am not my fear. It sometimes takes up occupancy inside of my mind, but it is not who I am. It's fundamentally not me. And
Mhm.
so when I could suddenly see it as something that was outside of me, it suddenly didn't feel like I was at war with myself. It was saying, no, I can speak you out. I can speak you down. I can have tools to be able to manage this. And I think likely people who I haven't experienced like anxiety or depression. I think there's things like that where people get overcome by it, but you are not depression. You are not anxiety. You are not that. It's taking up occupancy in you right now. And I think for me, I needed to understand that I am not my fear. I need to manage my fear, and I need tools and language to be able to speak to my fear, speak back to it, so that when it is what's controlling the narrative of my mind, I can own the true me. And the other thing I learned is that fear will never waste its time on the worst of us. It only wants to take and eat the best of us. And so if you
Mm.
think about as you're getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to your purpose in life, to the thing you're supposed to do, fear is just getting louder and louder and louder and louder. And that's actually a sign that you're likely getting close to what you're supposed to do. And so fear wants to shut down all that human potential. And I see it myself whenever I get these crazy ideas. Fear starts to say, oh, you're making it all about you, Tiffany. Oh, this is the Tiffany show. You're going to turn into this prideful, egotistical, crazy person that's not going to have anybody around them. And you better be careful because the people closest to you are going to think you're a fraud. And like just talking, 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 talking. And I'm like, oh, okay, make myself small, make myself small, make myself small, make myself small. And the truth of who I am is that I'm so passionate about other people. If I'm not constantly moving into discomfort and learning, I'll have so much less to share with the people who are willing to learn from me. It's like that's the truth of my heart and soul. And so it's like, oh, it makes perfect sense now that I can see all these ingredients out on the shelf, why fear would want to tell me this story. And it's easier to believe bad things about yourself for some reason. It's easier to believe the criticism. It's easier to believe your mistakes. It's easier to own those things that you fail. At least it is for me, than it is to really step into the things I've actually accomplished. And so, as a long answer to you asking me why I think it's important to understand our fear, but that's why, like, our human potential, I think, balances on it.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna set
So,
like
what are you going to do with that, Lindsay?
say, send me a bill for my therapy session this afternoon. That this is so okay. Tiffany,
He's
this
like,
is
I'm sorry, this isn't what I signed up for.
no, this is 100% exactly what I said. So, it's so interesting. You were like speaking right to my guts today. And it was so interesting because we launched this new project called The Band. And it's this idea that everybody come join my band. Let's practice together like you would in the garage as a teen. And you're just trying to figure out your part. What am I doing here? How do I play the drums? So there's a lot of this movement happening.
Mhm.
But we wanted to start this new program because so many people said, I want to learn soft skills, but I read a book, but I still don't really know how to listen or coach, whatever. So we launched this program, and my team said, who do you want to have come on the porch the day you launch the program? I could get teary about this. And I was like, we have to call Tiffany because it's exactly this. Because I knew you would say exactly what I selfishly needed to hear. Thank you all for coming and being a part of my therapy session. But this is exactly it, that idea. The last few days, I'm like, man, I am so fearful. And I don't experience that a ton, probably because I'm not like pushing hard enough. But I'm like, I feel like this morning, I'm like, why am I shaking? I'm like, I didn't even have that much coffee. What is happening in my body right now? As
Wow.
we launch this, I feel unusually like self-doubtful and intimidated. This is and you're right. It's like that fear is like screaming because I'm pushing, doing something that I know the world needs, that I love. And that feels very vulnerable right now. And I just love what you said. I'm gonna like take the transcript of this, write a book, and send it to you with your name on the bottom. But
That's great.
this idea that fear doesn't take its time on the worst of us, that it really does want to shut down our potential. And I love that you're saying you can like use it as a trail of breadcrumbs almost too. Like, oh, you're getting louder? I must be getting closer. Isn't that interesting? As it hums louder and louder. That just you saying that gives me so much courage because I see you do it all the time too. I see you go out and push and try new things, which
Well,
is so
what so
exciting.
and like the thing you're this is so interesting too. So when fear is loud, it's making the scenario about you, where you are the central cast. You're the central character in the story, right? Like, Lindsay, I don't know. It's like, no, you're not. You didn't put together the band so that you would have something to do with your time. You've put together this project, the band, so that you would be able to share some of life's insights with people that you're trying to help on their journey. And fear's
Yeah.
like, no, 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 we're going to make this about you, Lindsay.
Oh my gosh,
We're
exactly.
going to make this about you. And you're like, oh, but I don't. And then it's like, no, this is my gift. I want to focus on other people. And fear's like, no, 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 this is about you.
That's
And I
right.
think that's the thing too, that fear is so crafty,
Mhm.
um, that you wouldn't have even thought about your own emotions around it if fear wouldn't have been like, hey, let's get your attention on this.
Yes, that's
Mhm.
exactly it. I wonder if anybody in the chat has ever had this experience where you're like, I'm going to do this thing because I believe in it and it's something good in the world. And then you're like, why am I sweating so much? This is like something I already know. Look at everybody's. This is funny because the chat is lighting up. Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. We get it. Yeah, everyone is understanding that experience. And I'm sure you see this when you're on your podcast, Tiffany, you're building content around this. Think about how much this is resonating with other people and somebody's finally put words to it.
Well, it gave me a lot of courage to keep going because,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
when you decide to talk about fear, it decides to get really loud and real with you. I would also encourage you guys to think, you even mentioned it, but there's usually a physiological response. I'm sure there's science behind this, but I'm not a sciencey person. I just observe things and share what I see.
Yeah.
Um, but I can tell my body responds. My everything starts to speed up, and I know then that like sort of fear has taken hold and not me. And I just encourage you. You said, Lindsay, like I was getting kind of sweaty. Like
Oh, yeah.
usually there's a physiological response where we could. That's my cue um, when I'm like, I've gotta pick up some of my tools and start repattering my thinking. Cause then I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm for others. That's what I'm actually about. I'm not these things. That is not true. You are lying to me. And then you can kind of get back on top of it. So let's see. Somebody said, I love the thought of making fear separate from you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not
Yep.
fighting yourself. It's like, no, that's not the soul of who I am. It's just taking up, taking up occupancy.
Yeah. There's this concept, and I wonder what you think about this. We learned it in coaching school that, self doubts serve a function for you when you're between like basically prepubescent. So between like 8 and 13, in that space, self doubts become part of our programming because back when we lived differently than we live now, if you were to leave the pack and do something that made you stand out, you could lose the support of everyone around you. So as a kid, you're kind of developmentally like trying to fit in and just get your, water and your food and your supplements for that day to get by. You don't really want to stand out at that age, which makes sense because middle school is the worst, actually, now that I say that. And so you have these self doubts that program themselves in. Maybe you're too loud, don't be so loud. You're too big, don't be so big. Those pieces. And later in life, they come back up as these kind of gremlins that start to nibble away whenever you go outside of what you perceived was your allowed space to be. Like, you can't be any bigger than this. It's almost like we have an internal thermostat, and you're like, I'm cranking it to 90. And your self doubts are like, no, you're not. Go back to 62 degrees. Get back down there. Do you ever when's a time when you've seen, maybe in the last decade even, where your self doubts really started to roar and you had to, or your fears started to roar and you had to talk yourself down? Can you think of a time where you've been in that?
Yeah, I think we have things that run in our head that we believe to be true, but we haven't actually proven are. So for me,
Yeah.
it was, I mean, this is like an obvious one, but that you cannot have a big job and have a lot of kids. I thought I had to pick one at some point. And for me, a lot of kids, as I have 4 kids, it's a lot of kids. As a working woman, my 24-year-old self would have said, you can't have a really big family and
Hmm.
have a relationship with them and have a big job. You're gonna have to pick one. And I had somebody say to me, like, why not? Why not? And I'm like, well, because that's what my head thinks.
Obviously.
And I think
Yeah.
there's things where we create these self-limiting beliefs that there's actually nothing that shows that. Now there's a totally different set of tools that you need if you're going to have 4 kids and a big job, but it's not that it can't be done. You're just going to solve it differently. And so I think our head can put constraint on things that our heart wants to do. And even this podcast, like, I mean, holy shit, I don't have any more time, right? I've got 4 kids, I have a baby, we were going through COVID. It was like all the things. My husband travels, all the things. I don't have time for it. But I was like, but if I want to do it, I will figure out how to make the
Mm.
time.
Yeah.
Um, and I think sometimes we have to trust that we'll figure it out when we really, really, really feel called to do something. So um, yeah.
I think that's amazing. But that's it. It's like, if you really want to do it, and that idea of why not, if you really want to do something, where did we learn that you can't have both? And do we want to really believe that?
Yeah, and I think people have their own versions of that. Some people it's like, I can't be rich and healthy. I can't be, I
Yeah.
mean, people have all these, I don't know, pick yours. Like people have these
Yep.
teeter-totters. I can't travel the world and have a steady job. I can't, I don't
Yep.
know. I don't know.
Yep.
Pick your teeter-totter. But everybody's got their own narrative. And for me, the dreams in my heart were to have a big impact in my life professionally, and the dream of my heart was to be a mom of a bunch of people. And
Yep.
so fear was saying, I'm sorry, you have to pick one. There's different
Yeah.
in people's hearts. um, those don't have to be your choices, but and I think fear has different names for people. Somebody said, if fear had a name for me, it would be never enough. um, and for me, mine is like, it says you're going to be selfish. I know other people say, I'm not pretty enough. I'm not presentable. I'm not lovable. I'm not, there's all different kinds of narratives. And we idealize where other people are often because it's the other end. It's the opposite, you know what I mean, of our
Yep.
fear. And that doesn't mean they don't have their own thing. It just has a different shade to it. So,
Yeah, that idea, you're bringing up that idea of comparison too.
mhm.
How have you kept yourself, you're in this really cool position where you've got this rad company, national recognition, Forbes knows who you are. How do you keep yourself from comparing, or what do you do when you're like, oops, I'm comparing again? What are some things that you tend to do that are helpful?
Um, I think there's some really practical things, and then I can go into some more heart things. One is I just don't consume a lot. Like I don't consume a lot on social media. I do like LinkedIn and stuff, but like as far as like following influencers and stuff, because it's not great for me.
Yeah.
I like really I am just not perfectly coiffed. I'm more likely to have like something, coming out of my head. But I think part of me dreams of being perfectly coiffed. And so I judge it. Like, you must not be very fun. You can't possibly be that curated and know how to laugh. Like, there's no
Yeah.
like, and so I start to become kind of judgy, and that doesn't bring out what I want to be. And so I've just learned it's not a productive space for me. But what it's usually revealing if I'm in that space is that I'm not confident in that area of my life. So
Mm-hmm.
right after I've had babies, when I don't feel good about myself, I'm like maximum judgy about that. And I just have to be like, you're being super cranky pants about this because you're not really happy with where you are right now. That's revealing that to you. You have a choice to do something about it or not. And I find when we are in the comparison game or we are in a place of judgment, it's usually because it's actually something we want. We just haven't figured out how to put together the behaviors or the decisions to get it. And
Yeah.
we're trying to make it wrong for somebody else to have it. And that's what I find for me is when I'm in that space, it's usually because I really want it and I just don't have the courage to say, I actually want that.
Yeah. And
or,
it's such
or I say like, they're probably not smart. Like I'm like intellectually superior in some way.
obviously I'm winning at another game.
Yes, I'm playing another game entirely, I
Yeah,
say, but it's not true. I mean, we want it, it's not true. And so
Yep.
I've gotten to things like this. Like, let's use women. I don't know. I'm assuming a lot of women are on here.
Yep.
Uh, I have begun to say, when it comes to my bodies, I'm not willing to do the work it takes to get to there. And then I'm owning where I'm at. Like, I'm just not willing to do the work to get there. It takes a level of sacrifice that I'm not willing to do.
Yep.
Great. I'm owning me, you're owning you, and we can coexist, and that's great. And that's been a real healthy way for me to, I don't know, get
Yeah,
peace.
I love that. Well, like kind of designating your focus. Like that's not something I'm going to focus on to this degree. Like that's not
Mhm.
something I want to spend the energy on. I'm going to spend it over here instead.
Right, totally.
Yeah. When you think about, because we talk a lot about, and last time we had you on the porch, we talked a lot about authenticity. And I wonder, what have you learned as a leader about the importance of stepping into who you are authentically, especially as we're talking about comparison and fear? How does authenticity play into this new, like this next level of your own leadership?
Yeah, I guess again, my head kind of goes in two places. One is that as the podcast becomes a project for sort of the outside world and not so
Yeah.
much for my inside walls, it's
Yeah.
really important to me. And I said this to my leaders that they still feel like I'm really authentically showing up for them because it can become this external project that has nothing to do with the people who I am leading day to day. And I don't want them to feel like I've lost a sense of honesty
Yep.
here. You know what I mean? And I'm just talking about it in the outside world. Um, the other thing I've found is it holds me accountable to the leader I want to be when you are sort of stepping into this space of owning your fear and being able to be honest about who you really are in every dimension. I feel like it holds me accountable to being that in every interaction. And I like that piece of it. Um,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes fear tells me I'm going to end up alone because what people want is, I know this isn't true, but fear tells me they want curated perfection. And you're kind of you're just full of words and stories and observation. Or that tells me, like, I don't have statistical data to back this up. I'm like, I just had to own, like, I don't know. I just observe things. I could be wrong. I don't read a lot of books. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
I'm not a scientist. And but I do feel like I've studied the human condition just from
Yes.
being a people leader for 20 years. And I just think I go back to what I said before. We just want people to normalize our existence. And so when we show up as leaders who have bruises and scars, and life has sort of put us in a tumbler, people start to say, like, oh, I can still get to where I want to go, even if it feels really hard. And I think that normalizes it.
I think that makes a lot of sense for sure. And I think about even, some people are private messaging me asking, what books do you have or what steps would you take in terms of building confidence? And I think first just going to your podcast and listening to your podcast because you do so much normalizing there around fear and around experience.
Yeah, the first episode in particular, I go through this fear interview, and it's guided by this marriage and family therapist. His name is Nathaniel McGuire, and while the answers are mine, you can go through that same process just by listening to the questions that he asks. And I would encourage you in your car or whatever to, like, audibly say out loud what fear says to you, or journal it if that's more comfortable for you, and
Yep.
really allow yourself to look honestly at the things that fear is trying to get you to believe about yourself. And
Yes.
and I think that that's a really good place to start, and then begin to think through, like, when I am in, I don't know, people use the words flow state, or when I'm at a place where I just know I'm giving my best to the things and the people around me, what does that look and feel like? And start to compare them, because my guess is there'll be a real story in the way that those line up. And again, I think we try to get courage in practicing perfection. And I would encourage people to start by practicing vulnerability and see how much, like, actual confidence that begins to give you, because then you're not hiding anything. It's
That's
just
right.
it's just the truth. So,
Yeah. I love that. And that idea of, your goal isn't perfection. Your goal is, it sounds like, is to keep moving where fear gets louder. You're just continuing to move
mhm.
and explore and help normalize everybody's experience. I
Yeah,
think that's such a
absolutely.
different goal than like, I will be perfect, I will be coiffed, I will have everything under control. Yeah. We had another question. I thought this was interesting, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. When you do take on a new project, how do you find the time when you know that your schedule is already too full? How do you find the time to manage that?
So of, like, really easy but obvious tool that I use, we're on EOS company, and there's a tool in there called the Delegate and Elevate exercise.
Mhm.
So literally, I write down everything that I do over the course of the week, from, like, scheduling a sitter, planning dinners, and I figure out what can I take and give to somebody else. So it could be I get my nanny for 3 more hours. It could be that I just stop doing it. Could be that there's a board that I step back from. It might be that I have a big project I need to wrap but you have to make the space. And I literally make a list of everything that I'm doing, estimate how much time I think it's going to take, and then you have to find a bundle of things that you're not going to do. Could be
Yes.
having your kids help with something, um, having your mother-in-law come over for a couple hours and help. I don't,
Yeah.
or hire somebody off of care.com for a few hours a week to help you have the capacity. But you do have to figure out what is going to move us, what is going to move. Um, and that helps. Like, next year, this is an example. We are not going to drive any of our kids to school. They're going to ride the bus. Doesn't fit. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know, but it's like 4.5 hours a week or something nuts. I'm like, this is wild. They're in three
Yes.
schools now. So that doesn't have to be everybody's decision, but it's like a silly thing like that that freed up a lot of time.
I can see
And I'm
that.
like, they're old enough, they can ride the bus. We don't need to drive them. They're going to love it. They'll probably learn a bad word. I don't know. And I'll have a few more hours. So you do, and like going through literally everything from like sun up to sundown, because it's not always work related things that create the capacity that you need. That's what I found.
That's really smart. I mean, that's just a very logical, non-emotional way too to kind of like, let's work through this. We can find a solution versus feeling like I can't fit it in, but I have to. I can't fit it in, but I have to. It's just putting it all on paper. I know how much you love being an EOS company too, and how much that's helped too with getting
Yeah, it's
clarity.
so obvious. I'm just like, I just don't get obvious things. Like time management, goal setting, all that is just struggle bus for me. I have to like
I
have
get
it
it.
very simple, because I just don't naturally have that in me. And so I have to like, I am very rigid because left to my own devices, I'm such a creator. I just don't get things done. And so that helps me stay committed to the things I want to become and the projects I want to do.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. Well, it's so fun to see you and hear all the things that you're doing and to even get to listen to Scared Confident. I can kind of pull Tiffany in my ear anytime I need to. And I'm sure if you haven't had a chance to listen, if you go to it's scaredconfident.com, but you can also search it in
Yeah, it's
Apple, Spotify, every place that you can listen to a podcast, you can find Tiffany and listen. I would highly encourage it. Take a minute and review. Give her 5 stars because it's fantastic. She's already got a ton of reviews, and they all are 5 stars because if you love today, you're gonna freaking love that podcast. I love that you came on today, Tiffany. It means a lot, especially as I launch the band and try something new and feel
yeah,
that
it's
fear
awesome.
yelling. It means a lot to just see you and get to connect with you. And you really do pave the way for so many of us, even though I don't get to see you all the time, knowing that you're out there and you're taking that risk. And I do see it through social media. I love that. I just feel so lucky. Go follow Tiffany on LinkedIn. Go listen to her podcast. She'll become a mentor for you, and a virtual mentor that we all really need. Thank you so much for your time, Tiffany.
Yeah, I'm proud of you, Lindsay, for stepping out. It can be hard to keep creating, and I'm proud of you for launching the band. I think it's super rad.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for coming. You know where to find us. Google Tiffany Sauder, TiffanySauder.com. You can go there too. There's plenty of ways to stay connected. Thank you for your time. I know a lot of people in the chat are saying thank you so much. I know people were furiously taking notes too, Tiffany. So if if you're on LinkedIn right now, you're like, I missed the Tiffany interview. I will take all of our notes. Sam and I take copious notes. We will put that up tomorrow with the recording so you can see the whole thing. Thank you so much, Tiffany. I hope you have a great rest of your night. Thanks for everybody for coming.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, guys. See ya.
See you soon.